In this video, Jordan Peterson talks about IQ, extroverts, and introverts.
Those random sets of abstract problem-solving questions is there's one dimension. That's it. Intelligence has one dimension. And it's one of the most terrifying statistics that are known to social scientists. And IQ is an extraordinarily powerful predictor of long-term success, especially in complex jobs. And the reason for that, it's quite straightforward. Most complex jobs throw random sets of complex problems at you. That's their definition. So for example, if you're working as a lawyer on complex court cases, you have to be able to read very quickly, you have to be able to abstract, you have to be able to problem solve, you have to be able to formulate arguments, and you have to do that repeatedly in different ways across very large spans of time. And so the fact that your ability to solve any set of random problems is a really good predictor of your ability to solve any set of random legal problems. It's more or less self-evident that that would be the case. But the thing is, the thing that makes IQ so damn powerful, and it's one of the personality traits, roughly speaking, the thing that makes IQ so powerful is you can basically get a decent measure of it in 20 minutes. It's very terrifying. Anyways, we'll go into IQ in some depths as we progress through the course. But you get one dimension out of a factor analysis of IQ. Now, in the personality domain, using descriptive items, you don't. You get 5 dimensions. And and what are these dimensions exactly? Well, you could think about them as, I think of them as sub-personalities. But here's some other ways of thinking about them, because we want to flesh this out a little bit. You could think of them as a frame of reference, so that if you're an extrovert, and I was going to tell you the extroverted question, does being around groups of people make you energetic, or does it exhaust you? And if you're the sort of person that, will go to a party and interact with 20 people, and then you have to go home and be by yourself for like 2 weeks, then you're introverted. Introverts are exhausted by social interactions. Extroverts are the opposite. They're energized by social interactions. And you might be in the middle, so that you can take it or leave it with regards to social interactions, but you're happy to go to them and you're happy to spend time by yourself. But a real extrovert, there'll be some of you in here, how many of you can't stand spending time alone? Okay, so there's only 2 that will admit it. Extroverts are more likely to admit that sort of thing too, by the way. And how many of you like to spend time alone or would rather be alone? Okay, so there's a preponderance of introverts in this class, by all appearances. But that's a pretty canonical question for extroversion versus introversion. It's a very stable trait, by the way. It manifests itself early in life, and it's stable across the age span. Not completely. Introverts can learn to be extroverted, and extroverts can learn to spend time on their own. I think that actually your capacity to expand your ability past the initial constraints of your biological temperament is something like the development of character or wisdom. So if you're an introvert by nature and you learn how to be extroverted, then that expands your domain of competence. And if you're extroverted and you learn to be introverted, the same thing. But it's almost like, imagine a distribution of introversion here, extroversion here, a normal distribution. You're set, when you're young, at somewhere along that distribution with some range around it. And I think what you do as you mature, if you develop your skills, is you expand that range, but the place at which you're set doesn't move that much. So, okay, so you can think about them as sub-personalities. You can think about them as frames of reference. So frame of reference would be something like, well, since you're extroverted, you value being with people. And so you're going to look at the world. For example, if you're extroverted, you come into a room like this, you think, oh, look, it's a whole field of opportunity for social interactions. And if you're introverted, you think, well, maybe I'll go sit up in the corner and hope everybody leaves me the hell alone. But so it's an a priori set of perceptual structures that you bring to bear on a whole sequence of environments. So for example, maybe you're high in openness versus low in openness. That's the creativity dimension. People who are high in openness tend to be artists and entrepreneurs. And open people will look at other people as opportunities to engage in interesting intellectual conversations. And so you can tell when you're talking to someone open, especially if they're very high in openness, because they're going to want to talk to you about ideas or about aesthetics. That's what it's going to go right away. So that's how they view you, as a source of that sort of conversation. That's how they view the landscape. Someone who's high in neuroticism, which is a negative emotion dimension, is more likely to view the world as a place of threats to be protected against, because they're more anxious and more prone to emotional pain. So anyway, so that's the frame of reference issue. So there's something about your underlying fundamental psychological traits that determine or influence at least your value structures, and they do it at the level of perception. They also tend to set your goals. So extroverted people have as one goal the opportunity to engage with other people. So extroverts love parties. They live for parties. They love to tell jokes as well. That's a very good behavioral marker of extroversion. And so because they value those sorts of things, they set them as goals in their life. Or you could say the extroversion operating within them sets them as goals within their life, depending on how deterministic you want to be about it. So their patterns of behavior, that's another, at a micro level. You know, I showed you that sort of hierarchy of value / frames of references that ranged from micro behaviors up to high order abstractions. You can extract out personality by looking at people's micro actions as well. And one of the papers that I want you guys to read that's on the course website has to do with our investigation into behavioral markers of the big 5 traits. Yep.
What defines introversion? Is it simply the lack of extroversion?
Maybe. We don't know exactly. I'll get back to that. At the moment, that's kind of what it looks like, is that introversion is something like the absence of extroversion. But let me explain extroversion more particularly. It'll make more sense. Okay. All right. So you can think about them as stable motivations. So for example, people who are high in agreeableness, I can generally tell people who are high in agreeableness when they come into my clinical practice and I start asking them about their biography. Because my experience has been that people who are agreeable will tell you their biography defined by relationships they've had over their life. So agreeable people are high in compassion and high in politeness. It looks like the maternal dimension. It looks like the pair bonding dimension, something like that. And so agreeable people tend to characterize their lives in terms of the intimate relationships they've had. And so those are also people who would value an intimate relationship over anything else, if agreeableness is the uppermost trait that characterizes their personality. Then, well, systems of values, we already talked about that a little bit. The higher you are in a given trait, the more you value certain opportunities that are associated with that trait. And so I think it's worthwhile thinking about traits along using all of those different conceptual schemes to understand what constitutes a trait.